Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. Today I'm going to do a response to the revolutionary with the tattoos. A couple of days ago, he did a video entitled Why I Will Still Not Vote, or something to that effect, in 2012. And this is my reply to that video. The first thing I want to say is this. There is nothing revolutionary about not voting. In fact, that is counter-revolutionary. In fact, that is apathetic, and it is a manifestation of intellectual laziness. And in fact, the way I see it, it's an act of surrender. And even more important than that, it dishonors our ancestors, our parents and grandparents who fought and died for our right to vote. Do you really think that our people would face the police dogs, face the police batons, face the loss of life for something that had no value? They saw the value in our right to vote. That's why they fought and died for it. They saw that if they could not elect the politicians, then they could not influence what the politicians did. They realized that they would not be able to stop or end Jim Crow, segregation, and humiliation without being able to elect the politicians in power who make the decisions to implement such laws. And I want to go on to another point. Again, it is not revolutionary not to vote. The brother Malcolm X, the revolutionary Malcolm X, understood the value of the vote. And that is clear when one listens to his famous speech entitled The Ballot or the Bullet. In that speech, he talks about the importance of the vote and the impact that the vote can actually have. Another revolutionary, Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, wrote a book entitled Black Power. In that book, the revolutionary outlines how important the vote is and how much potential it has to affect some change, some reform. Also, the revolutionary organization, the Black Panther Party, realized the importance of the vote when they ran candidates for office. When people like Eldridge Cleaver ran for office, the Panther Party knew that the vote had value and significance. So there is nothing revolutionary about not voting. In fact, not voting is counter-revolutionary. It is an act of surrender. Basically, what you're doing is giving your enemy power to make decisions that impact your life. You're saying you can have the power. You can make all the decisions. And it's like a war. In war, no intelligent soldier would voluntarily surrender some of the crucial weapons in his arsenal. It's like a chess game. No smart chess player would voluntarily get rid of some of his key pieces before the game even starts. That would put you in a situation where you're not playing on a level playing field. Every other group realizes the significance of the vote. And it's a shame that someone with over 40,000 subscribers would basically say that the vote has no value. Shortly before the crucial midterm elections. It is, just simply irresponsible for someone to make such statements. Now, during your presentation, you talked about the Electoral College, and you said that the popular vote means nothing. Nothing could be further from the truth. Of course, as we all learn in civics class. In elementary school, in fact, in middle school, we learned that the president is elected by electors. But during your presentation, you did not point out how those electors are chosen based on a popular vote within those states. Electors are pledged to certain candidates. And when a candidate wins the popular vote in a state, the electors who are pledged to vote for that particular candidate become the chosen electors. And their vote is consistent with the popular vote in that particular state. So the notion that elections don't matter is just factually inaccurate. Now, some people will say that technically the electors can decide not to vote for the person that they pledged to, or the candidate that they have pledged to. And in some respects, there is some truth to that. However, that is very rare. It is almost practically a non-occurrence. And the very few times where someone has voted contrary to their pledge, it has had no impact on the election. Now, you cited the whole disaster during the Bush versus Gore campaign and election. That election is not an example of how the vote doesn't matter. That election was decided based on a few votes, a difference of a few votes. If anything, that situation is a reminder of how important it is for each one of us to get out there and vote. Now, so that dispenses with the argument with respect to the Electoral College. Now, beyond the Electoral College, there is no dispute that the people directly elect their congressman, their senator, their mayor, their governor, and their local, state representatives and state senators. That is beyond dispute. That's undisputable. You know, the fact of the matter is the people directly elect their local officials. So that is democracy, and that's an example of how the vote, popular vote, actually matters. That can't be disputed. Now let's talk about how significant the vote is, starting first with the presidential level. It is very important to vote for the president for a couple of reasons. The president sets the tone for legislation in this country. His position puts him in a position where he can voice support for legislation or opposition to legislation. So he is instrumental in the passage of legislation in this country. Also, the president appoints members to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And as anyone knows, as most people are aware, the Supreme Court renders decisions that impact every single aspect of our lives. And the decision to appoint a Supreme Court justice is very important because it can determine the outcome of very crucial cases that directly affect our lives. Cases ranging from abortion, civil rights, voting rights, affirmative action, gun control, even electoral politics in terms of the funding of campaigns, all kinds of decisions, free speech, and the right to privacy. All of these issues are decided by the Supreme Court. So to suggest that the vote matters not is simply ignorant and is not taking a full assessment of the facts. Also, the president appoints the attorney general. He appoints other key government officials that make decisions that impact our lives in a wide range of areas, in education, in civil rights. The Attorney General sets the tone. They decide whether or not to prosecute voting rights cases or other types of civil rights cases, dealing with affirmative action, dealing with all kinds of issues that affect our lives. They even make decisions with respect to drug enforcement. They decide whether or not to enforce certain drug laws, and they set certain priorities. And we can see from the track record of Eric Holder that he has made an effort to combat the problem of mass incarceration in the Black community as a whole. And his track record is clear. So that is his tenure, Eric Holder's tenure, is a prime example of why elections matter. Now, I'm going to move on to Congress. And as I stated before with respect to legislation, Congress decides all types of legislation that affects our lives. They decide issues whether or not people get funding for school, the issue of student aid, they address that issue. They address sentencing. They address food assistance. There are people that want to get rid of Pell Grants, loans that make it possible for struggling students from poor households to get an education. There are all kinds of decisions that Congress makes that directly affect our lives. They make decisions about criminal justice. For instance, Congress passed the Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced the disparity between crack and powder cocaine sentencing. That kind of law directly impacts our lives because a disproportionate number of African Americans have been targeted for drug enforcement, and more often than not, African Americans are more likely to be involved in crack cocaine as opposed to powder cocaine in terms of selling drugs. And such laws that, had harsher sentences for crack cocaine directly impacted and disproportionately impacted the Black community. And the Fair Sentencing Act reduced that disparity. So that's an example of how the laws that Congress passes affect our lives. And there are countless examples. Healthcare reform. Before healthcare reform was passed, insurance companies could completely disqualify people from coverage based on pre-existing conditions. And now that is not the case. And now many people who did not have health insurance now have health insurance as a result of healthcare reform. But many of the state governors and state governments have decided not to expand Medicaid coverage. So people are without health care coverage because of decisions made on the local level. And that's another example of why local elections matter. Now, back to the local level. Now, we directly elect our governor, our state officials, our city council, and our state representatives. And they make decisions that impact our lives on a daily basis. They make decisions about education funding. They make decisions about policing. They determine whether or not certain policing tactics will be used. They determine whether or not a certain person will be appointed police chief, and all kinds of decisions. They make decisions that impact our lives directly. And that's a reason why voting matters. You have the situation in Ferguson. This is a prime example why voting matters. African Americans make up the majority of the population there. but you have a predominantly white city council.